Hi everyone, what's going on, and welcome back to another video on Amazon's New World. So there's kind of been a host of new press articles that have been released over the past week, and I just kind of wanted to touch on a few of them because there's a few little bits of interesting information that have been kind of released in a few of them, and I kind of wanted to touch on some of that and drag some of that into sort of just a short little video. So just to give a very brief bit of background to these, a lot of these press guys were invited over to the Amazon studios and given a sort of what they've called like a hands-on experience with the New World Alpha, and then they've gone away and they've also talked to some of the developers, including Scott Lane, like the studio lead, and they've gone away and basically published these series of articles, you know, places like IGN, PC World, etc., etc. And you know, they kind of posted snippets from these interviews as well as some of their comments and their experiences with the gameplay, and it's kind of from that we're going to be drawing some of our information, because it's really been a bit of a mixed bag of response for them. They've kind of praised some of the features, particularly like around the combat and stuff, people have been really quite impressed with. But then in other areas, you know, in kind of the way some of the PvE elements and sort of the amount of content and stuff in the game, they've sort of criticised. But anyway, let's actually dig into some of these and kind of touch on them. I want to start first with the IGN article that got published. So there have actually been two articles released by IGN by the same author about a week apart. But the latest article had a very interesting comment by Scott Lane, who is the studio director, and I'll actually quote it now. And he said, "We will always consider bringing things back. We are set on launching our alphas and betas this way and seeing what happens." So this was a quote that was actually made in direct reference to the sort of significant PvP changes, you know, changing from the sort of open world full loop PvP system to this much more opt-in sort of slightly safer PvP system, and he made that in direct quote to those changes that they've had kind of since the last alpha test. I mean, and given the negative feedback I've kind of seen around Discord and Reddit, it is perhaps not surprising that Scott Lane felt required to kind of make mention of this, but I also feel that it is at least a good sign that Amazon has an awareness of the community feeling on this, at least from part of the community, and you know, I think it's a good sign that at least they're aware of it, you know, and feedback is being taken on board. I mean, personally, I've always felt there is kind of a middle ground that could be walked here, something that sort of satisfies some of the more hardcore PvP players, while also not being quite as severe as a, you know, full loop PvP system. Both GameSpot and MMO both kind of seem to be quite surprised that Amazon was surprised that this open world PvP could be kind of seen as quite toxic, and both go on to mention that while they feel that there should be some change away from the full open loop PvP system, they both feel that perhaps the toggle system is maybe a step too far and there's a more middle ground. GameSpot goes to talk on about the option of maybe looking at PvP servers, you know, talking about maybe putting on limited zones, areas where you have to toggle on to be able to actually, you know, go into that area. So maybe certain areas where rare resources are enclosed, etc., things like that. I think the only other sort of thing of note to mention on the PvP before we move away from it is that based on the current system, it appears you can only toggle on or off in your housing, in where your house is based. So in effect, you shouldn't be able to just go out into the open world while you're mining, you know, spot a weaker player, toggle PvP on, kill him, and then quickly toggle it off again before his mates turn up. It is apparently not going to be that simple to just press a switch to toggle on or toggle off. You're going to have to make that decision before you leave basically your camp. And I think at least that is one thing in its favour. At least it's not going to be a completely abusable system. So I just kind of wanted to hop back to one of the IGN articles for a moment, because I think it has some really interesting conversation and topic about kind of the tech behind the game, because I think this is something that isn't really talked about. You know, we look at the actual game mechanics, the game features, the graphics, what does it look like, how's it going to play, but we don't really talk a lot about how it's been built and some of the mechanics that are going around that. I mean, firstly, we actually have the Lumberyard engine itself. Obviously, it's kind of built on the back of the Cry engine, but it's something that Amazon has really gone out of their way to build and develop specifically for New World, basically, you know, with this actually building their own engine. And I think that's going to give them an element of control that you're not necessarily going to see so much in other games. I think it gives them an element of hopefully being able to then create new content quite quickly going forwards. But more than that, we're also going to have a lot of it being server based. Obviously, Amazon has a lot of servers, they make mention of this. They're going to be using the Amazon Web Services and the cloud to do a lot of the in-game calculations on their side. So rather than when you swing a sword, you calculating that action and the repercussions of that on your computer and sending it off to the server so that the other player knows, instead when you swing the sword, or even the sword, Amazon's server is going to calculate what happens there and then send the results back to you. So it's going to be doing all the simulation on its side, and that is pretty unique, and that is something that not really any other game really does to quite this scale. I mean, obviously this is something that can only really be done because of the scale of funding and resources that Amazon has at its disposal, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that pans out in the long term. Does that make any significant difference to what we feel in game? I think it's certainly something that quite a few people and quite a few other dev companies are going to be watching. In an effort to slightly raise the tone of this video and bring things back to a slightly more positive note, one area pretty much all the articles do agree on and do say works really well is the actual combat system. They all talk about it feeling very fluid and very dynamic and very fast paced in a way that you don't often see from MMOs on this size, particularly when we're having these 50v50 large scale factional warfights. The fact that there's no sort of tab targeting system and it's all fully independent and fully physically interactive, i.e. if a player aims an arrow at you and shoots an arrow at you, it actually has to physically hit you to score. It's not a target and press 1, and you're just going to fire an arrow. You actually have to aim that arrow and get it to hit. That enemy player could duck behind a rock or move behind a log or move back behind the castle wall, and then you won't be doing any damage. And the same is true for swinging your sword, swinging your axe, or whatever weapon you're using at the time. You actually have to land that hit, and if a player counter thrusts at you, you've got to step back, block, recover, to deal with and counter with that combat. And that sort of fast and interactive combat system supposedly is working pretty nicely, and is actually one of the really good things about the game as it stands in the alpha currently. We also learnt from the IGN article that it's confirmed it's going to be basically a classless system, and this is something that's kind of been suspected for a while now, but it's nice to actually have it confirmed in writing. And you're going to have option to have the availability of 3 quick change slots for different weapon types. So that could be a musket, a spear, and a bow and arrow. And the availability to sort of switch and change between ranged and melee classes and different weapon classes depending on what you're going to be fighting up against is really awesome, and is one of the features I really quite like. I like the fact it's classless based, and it's going to be based on weapon proficiency points. So the more you use a certain weapon, the more points you're going to be earning for that weapon type, and you can spend on different sword thrusts, sword swings, etc. to change and affect the way that your characteristics are going to play. But this isn't going to change your core stats. So you're still going to have dexterity, strength, intelligence, which is going to affect your base character attributes, but you're then just not going to have a specific weapon class. It's also worth pointing out the article confirms that you're going to have to unlock these slots at different levels. So you're probably not going to start off with 3 weapon slots unlocked. You're probably going to start off with 1, and then maybe once you hit level 20 or 30 you'll maybe get the second one, and then 40 or 50 you'll get that 3rd weapon slot, so you can then quickly change between weapons depending on the situation. Just before we finish the video off, I just wanted to touch on a couple of the little cool features and tidbits that we got from the MMO RPG article. I'll put a link to the actual full article down below, but it makes mention of the map size being around 40 square kilometers, which is actually a really good size. So it's going to be nice that we're going to have plenty of land and space in which we can sort of run off and explore. There's going to be over a dozen different trades and crafts which we can level. So it's going to be nice to have lots of different crafts and trades in which we can kind of explore and get stuck into. Obviously there are going to be no NPC merchants. It's going to be a fully player driven economy. So all these crafts and trades are going to be super important to actually have a decent economy and have things to buy and sell. So it's going to be really kind of cool that we're going to get access to that. And Scott Lane himself actually made reference to server sizes. He said they're looking about 1,000 to 2,000 players on a server. He says there's not really any technical limitations, but it's more what works for players. I hope personally they go on the higher side of that. I think 1,000 is too low for a server. I think they want to be pushing 2,000 or more for a server. I know you don't want it to feel like there's too many people crammed into sort of one server, but it's also nice to feel that a server should feel busy, particularly as time goes on and sort of as probably some people drop off. You know, I know we'll probably get some new people trickle in, but they'll probably be more inclined to go to the newer servers. So you want servers to maintain a healthy population, so I hope they get a good sort of kickstart from the beginning. But anyway, that's really all I've got for you today. I just thought it was kind of cool to sort of recap on some of these articles. I'll post links to them all down, both in the description, and I'll try and post a comment with easy links to each of them. So you can actually go into each of them and kind of read these for yourselves if you want to, rather than just having me talking at you. Hopefully it's been useful. If it has, do please give the video a like, because it really helps. Of course, subscribe to the channel for loads more New World content, and I shall see you guys all on the next video.